welcome. My name is Ayush Alavadi. Now, Uber has put all autonomous vehicle tests on hold after one of its cars struck and killed a woman in Tempe, Arizona. This is the first pedestrian fatality involving the technology. A 49-year-old woman, Elaine Herzberg, was crossing the road when the Uber vehicle, operating in a fully autonomous mode under the supervision of a human safety driver, struck her, according to the Tempe Police Department. After the incident, she was transferred to a nearby hospital where she died from her injuries. When it comes to autonomous cars, it's not just Uber. Companies like Google, General Motors and Baidu have invested billions of dollars in the technology. So is it safe, and what does all of this mean for this nascent industry? We're joined by Siddharth Rathore, leader, driverless and flying cars practice group at Nishith Desai Associates. Siddharth, thanks so much for joining us on Bloomberg Quint. Now, this is an unfortunate incident, and of course this is the first such pedestrian fatality when it comes to this particular technology, but we've seen accidents in the past. We saw what happened a couple of years ago with the Tesla autonomous car testing. We also saw what happened in Tempe, Arizona, when an Uber car rolled over last year. So the technology is obviously in beta phase or testing phase, but in this particular incident, Siddharth, it's worrying to see, even in testing phase, that it can be a very dangerous technology, because there was, well, a driver here. The question that comes up is first a question of law and later a question of ethics. The question of law being, who would be liable in such a situation?
See, Ayush, if you remember when we spoke 2 years ago, we were speaking theoretically as to how what the liability issues would be. So now we are seeing theory play out into practicality. What has happened here is, as you mentioned, a driverless car, an autonomous vehicle, has crashed into a pedestrian, which is a very unfortunate incident. Having said that, now what the situation is, the driver who was there, in a way he was responsible for acting in an emergency situation, which he didn't do. So now the probe is into the company Uber as well as the driver. And the issue of liability, as we had talked about earlier, would range from the manufacturer, the the company itself, as well as the person behind the wheels, until and unless a time comes when the person is not required. Currently in the United States, they're actually pushing for laws to allow fully autonomous vehicles without having a driver behind the wheels. But now, given this incident, there's bound to be a setback in terms of moving the laws. We had also spoken about the ethical conundrum, which is also known as the trolley conundrum, which refers to a situation where the driverless car or the algorithm running the driverless car has to decide between two different situations, such as this, whether to avoid the pedestrian on the path or the passenger in the vehicle. Now, this is an unfortunate incident, however, but as time goes by, it's inevitable, like in the practical world, that these situations will keep playing out, and in a way this will just help.
Right, so I want to come in there because you mentioned Uber, and of course we reached out to Uber, and this is what Uber actually told us. Uber said, of course we did show you the Dara Khosrowshahi tweet as well, but Uber reached out saying, Uber actually mentioned, our hearts go out to the victim's family. We're fully cooperating with the Tempe police and local authorities as they investigate the incident. This essentially is Uber's response in the particular, in this matter. But Siddharth, you spoke about, well, the ethical conundrum as well, and that becomes, well, a topic of debate as well. Now, like you said, the last time we spoke, this was a lot more theoretical. Now that has become, well, a reality. And it's not just that. Google and Waymo, Google with Waymo, Alphabet with Waymo is also, looking at actually putting out a whole fleet of cars, I think, in Phoenix. So there's another issue that also crops up, being this particular district or this particular region or this particular state, with what's happening in Arizona. A lot of these companies are flocking there. One, because, well, they're favorable weather conditions, of course. It doesn't rain much out there. And secondly, well, because there's a lot of reports all over, essentially about how the jurisdiction is such and how the authorities are such that their permits have become easier? Because I know, some of these companies were called out in California. Will that become the next topic of debate, Siddharth? How these
correct.
particular companies are regulated?
So that is a very important point you bring up. So far, if you have been keeping track of the news, all these, the testing of autonomous vehicles was being carried out voluntarily by these companies themselves, whether it was Uber, whether it was Waymo, whether it was Google. However, now there will be calls for third-party testing of these vehicles. The government might get more involved now. There might be certain levels of tests to be for a driverless car to accomplish before it can be allowed to ply on the streets. And so this is a very unfortunate incident. However, in a way, this might actually help these companies rethink, take a step back, reassess. And while it is important to not negate the pace of technological advancement, at the same time, you should not be in such a hurry, whereas you have to keep in mind that artificial intelligence hasn't reached the level of a human being, the way a human being can react and predict another human being's response to a situation. Okay, so the fact remains that the person who unfortunately perished in this incident was not walking on the sidewalk. But all over the world, there are people who don't walk on the sidewalk. There are people all over the world who cross the road not necessarily on the zebra crossing. So, all these permutations and combinations have to be kept in mind if this technology is to become seamless. And having said that, this is the first unfortunate incident of this kind. But if you think about it, how many pedestrians, every day around the world perish due to car crashes, which are, governed by a person driving the car,
Right.
So, and not necessarily by an algorithm inside the car. So,
Right, Siddharth, it's interesting.
So, I mean,
it's interesting you bring
in
that
a way,
up,
like,
because
as these...
at the end of the day, we're talking about the company's algorithm, be it Google, be it GM, be it Uber, whoever's testing this. We're talking about the autonomous technology, and they've invested billions of dollars in this particular technology, which was promising until we hear about these situations, and we hope they don't actually occur in the future. But what I want to get, the perspective that I want to get from you as well is, okay, you mentioned what the ethical dilemma was, and clearly if someone, it's something that you've mentioned before in your report as well, which is essentially also if tomorrow there was a human being or an animal crossing the road, how would the car decide what the next move would be, or be it saving the people on board. These are ethical dilemmas which I don't think emerging technologies have yet caught up with. But when it comes to what happened in this particular crash, do you think that the debate and the narrative and the view really that essentially this technology will eventually mean a lot more road safety and a lot lesser casualties, you think that is a debatable thing to say now?
See, so it's an interesting question, because the entire premise on which this entire advance of the autonomous vehicular technology was going on was the fact that autonomous vehicles are safer than normal vehicles, statistically speaking. Having said that, it is not just about statistics, right? It's also about public opinion. And right now, obviously, public opinion with regards to autonomous vehicles is going to take a severe setback. Having said that, this might be, in a way, a push for governments to, pull up their socks and make necessary, however, appropriate regulations, so that, these autonomous vehicles and the companies which are pushing them are adequately tested and verified, and so also liabilities are decided, because right now people are confused as to who is to be held liable. Of course, Uber is not going to have a good time handling this entire situation. neither is the driver who was behind the vehicle, and right now the Vienna Convention on road safety and traffic still, while it provides for plying of driverless vehicles, at the same time it provides for a person to be behind the wheel of an autonomous vehicle. Having said that, the person behind the wheel is in some way still responsible. There will come a time when the entire responsibility is with the algorithm in the car and the manufacturers and the intelligent transport system of the city, which allows these autonomous vehicles to ply, speaking in the future. But this is a situation where a lot of food for thought and time to reflect for policymakers to think of the best way to avoid such situations in future. And at the same time, I guess even the public has to, at least in areas where that driverless cars are plying, you may have to have particular signboards and warning signs saying that driverless cars are plying here. Please, there are certain limitations with the car, so please either remain on the sidewalk, or we all are told to do that, but I guess as this technology is advancing, you have to keep in mind these extra safety norms. Look at, for example, till date, it's very unfortunate, but you see plane crashes, right? And with every plane crash, there is investigation into how that plane crashed and how this can be avoided in future. Similarly, the same will happen in this autonomous vehicular technology industry, because this is inevitable. The reason that Uber and Waymo are pushing this is because this makes commercial sense for them. Keeping aside, the socio-economics benefits that we had spoken about 2 years ago, which of course now people will not be as enthusiastic about for the time being given this incident. But there has to be a balance between a private player seeking his commercial objective, as well as the government at the same time making sure that the public safety and the public good is at the forefront while these technologies are being advanced.
Right, Siddharth, and whilst we're having this conversation, I think it's important, since we are live, that I have gotten some confirmation, and this is from Bloomberg, and this is the headline which you can catch on the website as well. It says, Uber victim steps suddenly in front of self-driving car. Let me, elaborate on what it is, and we can have the last word from you on it as well. Police say a video from the Uber self-driving car that struck and killed a woman Sunday shows her moving in front of it suddenly, a factor that investigators are likely to focus on as they assess the performance of the technology. In the first pedestrian fatality, the Uber had a forward-facing video recorder which showed the woman was walking a bike at about 10 p.m. and moved into traffic from a dark center medium. It's very clear it would have been difficult to avoid this collision in any kind of mode, says the police chief. So this is something that's ongoing, so we're not going to comment on it. But in terms of this revelation, Siddharth, it sort of also backs up the other side of the argument, which is essentially that these are things which the technology will have to catch up with or actually adapt to over the coming years.
Yeah, that's thanks for the news flash there, Ayush. So that, like I said earlier, while the investigations are going on, and it would not be right for us to be the investigators ourselves here. Yeah. Having said that, think about a situation where you are the person driving the car, right? This would be difficult for you to avoid this crash as well, there is arguments to say that, a robot cannot predict a human being as well as a human being can. But to be honest, when you're driving a car, you assume that nobody is going to come in front of you, right? Like you and me drive our cars and we assume, and to a certain extent, we also land up taking certain risks, because if we drive with the thought that, somebody might just cross the road suddenly, we'll never, go beyond the speed of 30 or 40 kilometers an hour. So, of course, since this is a new technology, obviously, it's a way more sensitive issue. People have gotten so used to normal car crashes, and if we shouldn't even go into the statistics every day how many people perish due to normal car crashes. So this is a sensitive issue, but as and when time plays out, statistics are there to show you that, while of course this is not 100% safe technology and there is scope for improvement, in the long run, this might be safer for everyone rather than a normal car, and only time will tell. And of course, this is, like you said, it's still a technology in its beta version, and maybe it's not completely right that these companies are pushing for these technologies to be allowed, at such an aggressive pace.
Right.
It is not necessarily a bad thing that, there might be a pause and a setback, and regulators might actually scrutinize this, because this is a real issue now. It's not, driverless cars are already plying on the streets and they're already beginning to cause irreparable damage.
Right.
So this is not a time for policymakers to also sit back on their heels, and it's time for them to also look at this incident. And so it's an experience for the police as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Siddharth. I think those are very fair points that you made when it comes to the autonomous technology on the whole. I really appreciate you joining us, and for all of you watching, well, like Siddharth was saying, this is an emerging technology, and it's an unfortunate incident that has occurred in Arizona. But we must remember that in the long run, we'd only hope if these companies continue to test these particular vehicles or this technology, that everyone is safe and sound, and that this only leads to perhaps more awareness about the technology. Thanks so much for watching, and stay tuned to Bloomberg Quint.